All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel where we take a look at great theories of everything ancient and modern and try to parse them up and figure out the best ways to employ these things to benefit our lives. And today is our 577th video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory from one Dewey B. Larson. Mr. Larson was an American engineer who lived in the 20th century and died back in 1990. He wrote books on physics and chemistry and astronomy, and he's also got a book on metaphysics and 2 books on economics. And they're all based on the same theory. So he has one overarching general theory that you can apply to any subject. He only lived long enough to apply it to a handful of subjects. Some of his associates have applied it further afield, but theoretically it can be applied to anything. Larson is one of few scientists to propose a cosmology based upon not matter, not energy, but motion. The universe is made out of motion. Larson's first postulate of his 2 fundamental postulates, his first postulate states that the universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. Okay, so motion is the fundamental component of the universe, and motion is the relationship between space and time, which implies a reciprocal relationship. All of our scientific quantities are merely fractions, with space or time as the numerator and time or space as the denominator. Space or time can come in multiple dimensions, and space and time have no independent existence. They only exist together in motion. And when Larson is thinking, considering motion, sorry about that. I think we're still moving here. When Larson is talking about motion, he's in particular speaking of scalar motion, which is kind of a more generic kind of motion. This is a motion with a magnitude, but no specific direction. You can conceive of a scalar motion if you consider a balloon and you put dots on it with a magic marker. As you blow up that balloon, all of the dots will be moving away from one another. And if you contract the balloon, all the dots will be moving toward one another. This is a scalar motion. Every dot is moving away from every other dot, meaning every dot is moving in every direction. And that outward motion is the fundamental motion in the reciprocal system, always existing, omnipresent, and eternal. Larson calls it the progression. And when that progression is occurring at the speed of light, which is 1 unit of space per 1 unit of time, Larson calls that the progression of the natural reference system. And this is the natural system of reference. We use a stationary system of reference, and that's why our science is all fouled up and can't come to ultimate conclusions. If we instead substituted this natural reference system, the reference system that the universe actually conforms to, then things become a little bit more simple. and we could actually make real progress. And so Larson calls that the progression of the natural reference system, and that is perceived by us as being absolutely nothing. And the only way that we're able to perceive anything is by reversing the reversals of that natural reference system in 3 dimensions, which eventually gives rise to that inward motion of the balloon, which is gravitation. And that is the manifestation of matter. There's a lot more to talk about with that. If you'd like to go into a little bit more detail with that, check out any of my first 474 videos on the subject, and I'll give you a little bit more. And we plug it into some of the Larson scientific books, many of which I've read in their entirety on this channel. And but today we are looking at one of Larson's books on economics, which is called The Road to Permanent Prosperity. And Larson applies the same general principles to the system of economics. Economic system is one that is dynamic, in motion, and he posits two streams and 2 reciprocal aspects, production and consumption. And he attempts to impose scientific thinking and language onto economics, which he considers to be a more of a sociology, a political ideology, where the economists are attempting to impose their preferences, ideological preferences, onto their economic theory. And Larson recoils from that and says, you have to, propose economic solutions that are in harmony with the laws of physics. And if you don't do that, you're going to set up an economic system that is going to collapse. And so first you must, abide by the laws of physics, and then you can attempt to deal with your ideological proclivities. Larson comes up with a lot of other stuff. If you want to start from the beginning of this book, go back 7 weeks or so in the archives and start with chapter 1. But right now we are in the middle of chapter 23 of this book that's called Boom Dampeners. That's the basic idea that Larson uses to arrive at a proposal for the road to permanent prosperity. He believes that that road is that we get on that road by eliminating or drastically reducing the amplitude of the boom and bust cycles of the economic system. The economic system has booms and busts, and when we go into the bust area, things can get ugly. And so instead of going wildly up and down with the cycle of boom and bust, we want to just go a little up and a little down and a little up and a little down. And Larson has a number of proposals for doing that. Here in this chapter 23, Boom Dampeners, he is talking about that, but he's mainly talking about proposals that other people have come up with, and whether they work or not. And then in the following chapters, he'll be putting together his own proposals that are based on many of the laws, principles that he has developed in the earlier chapters. So you may want to go back to the beginning and start from there. But if you just want to hang on here, You probably can get the gist of it if you pay attention. Okay, so we are about to start a section that is called Changing Reserve Requirements. And so this is another method that the feds have used in order to try to, dampen booms and busts, boom and bust cycles in the economy. And Larson's appraisals, and then we'll wrap up this chapter and maybe be able to start the next one. Okay, changing reserve requirements. Another credit control tool made available to the Federal Reserve in 1933 is that of changing the legal reserve requirements of commercial banks. The action of this device is explained by the Federal Reserve as follows, quote, "Two things happen when required reserve percentages are changed. First, there is an immediate change in the liquid asset or secondary reserve position of member banks. If reserve percentages are raised, banks that do not have enough excess reserves to cover the increase in requirements must find additional reserve funds by selling liquid assets in the market or by borrowing from other banks or from the reserve banks. If reserve percentages are lowered, individual banks find themselves with a margin of excess reserves available for investment in earning assets and for debt repayment. Since banks maintain their earnings at the highest level consistent with solvency by keeping their own resources as fully invested as possible and by avoiding debt, their usual response to a lowering of reserve requirements after retiring any indebtedness is to acquire earning assets." End quote. In the terms of reference of this present work, all of the foregoing can be succinctly expressed by saying that the effect of varying the reserve percentages is to change the amount of money that the banks must keep in storage. As explained in Chapter 15, the significant quantity in banking practice, so far as the general operation of the economic system is concerned, is the size of the reserves, the amount of money purchasing power actually held in storage in the banking reservoir. An increase in the reserve requirements means that the banks must keep more money in storage. If they do not have excess reserves, they must take some action to curtail the amount of loans relative to deposits, thereby withdrawing money from the circulating purchasing power stream and diverting it to storage. A decrease in the reserve requirements enables them to draw money from storage and put it back into the active stream of purchasing power by increasing loans or purchasing securities. A change in the reserve requirements is thus the kind of an action that is necessary in order to offset inflationary or deflationary trends. But here again, the response to such changes is not specific enough to enable using this device as the primary control. Furthermore, there are practical obstacles that make the changes in reserve percentages less flexible and continuously adaptable than other instruments of monetary management, as the Federal Reserve System sees the picture. These changes are therefore useful more as an auxiliary control device than as an essential feature of the control mechanism. This section is called Foreign Trade. The effects of foreign trade on the domestic price level and purchasing power flow were discussed in Chapter 16 and 17. No further comment is necessary at this time except to say that in the overall control of the reservoir transactions, any unbalance in foreign trade has the same effect and must be treated in the same manner as any other transaction affecting the money reservoirs. Okay, then we get to a section that's just called discussion. As emphasized in the theoretical development, direct credit dealings play only a small part in the modern economy, and credit, from a functional standpoint, is primarily a means of making withdrawals from money storage. Bank depositors make both deposits and withdrawals, but there is a continuing excess of deposits, and the net result of the transactions between the bank and its depositors is that money goes into bank storage. Credit is a device whereby this money can be withdrawn from storage for use by other individuals or agencies. Unfortunately, the inputs and withdrawals do not always stay in balance. Quite the contrary, the normal tendency is toward an unbalance, either in one direction or the other. When economic conditions are such that the consumers are inclined to be cautious and save rather than spend, thus increasing the amount of money available for lending, the borrowers have less opportunity for profitable use of the money, and they therefore reduce rather than increase their borrowings. Conversely, in these periods when the consumers are inclined to spend rather than save, the demand for loans is greater than normal. The result is that we experience an alternating cycle of inputs into money storage and withdrawals from that storage, part of the general phenomenon of the business cycle. The credit control operations of the Federal Reserve System that have been discussed in the preceding pages are aimed at dampening these cyclical movements by restricting the amount of credit during the upswing and making it easier to obtain during the downswing. Experience has indicated that these operations do actually make some contribution toward their objective, but their usefulness is limited by the fact that they operate indirectly, and hence their effect is somewhat uncertain. In terms of the automobile analogy, we may say that we have here some devices that will turn the wheels of the car and thus change the direction of motion. But changing direction is not our objective. It is merely a means to an end. Our real objective is to stay on the road, and this requires much more than merely being able to turn the wheels. First, we must have some way of knowing where the road is, so that we will know exactly when and how much to change our course. Second, we must have a positive control system, so that we will know not only the kind of a response that the system will make to our control actions, but also the magnitude, or at least the approximate magnitude, of the change that will result from a specific amount of application of the control system. Keeping the economic machine on a smooth course requires economic information and facilities of an analogous nature, but existing economic theory and practice do not meet these requirements. There is no clear understanding, either among bankers or among economists, as to where the smooth economic road is located. Consequently, when it becomes evident that the economy is in trouble because it is off course, no definite indicator is available to define the amount of change that will have to be made in order to get back on the road. nor is there even any general agreement as to which direction the change should take. Almost every move that is made by the regulatory agencies comes under fire from some quarter. As expressed by Reynolds, quote, "The Federal Reserve Board will never win a popularity contest. It has the peculiar misfortune to come under attack from precisely opposite standpoints." End quote. This inability to chart a clear course, together with the fact that most of the tools available to the Federal Reserve and other government agencies lack the direct and positive connection with the business cycle that would produce just the right amount of movement, even if those agencies had some reliable means of identifying the correct action, explains the erratic performance record of the credit control measures. The significant accomplishment of the theoretical development in the earlier chapters, so far as the stabilization question is concerned, is the positive identification of the factor that determines the direction in which the cycle is moving and the magnitude of the movement. From the facts brought out in this investigation, it is now apparent that the presence of reservoirs in the circulating stream of money purchasing power is the key to the whole situation. Here is where the business cycle originates, and here is where it must be controlled. If the control is to be effective, by measuring the changes that take place in the levels of these reservoirs, something that can easily be done on a continuous basis, we can determine exactly what is currently happening. And by taking appropriate action on the basis of this information, we can counterbalance any tendency to move away from the equilibrium condition, thus keeping the economy on a permanent, even keel. The various practical methods of taking this appropriate action will be explored in the next two chapters. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 23 on boom dampeners. And that last paragraph is kind of where he gets to the crux of the issue. There are two streams. One is the circulating stream of money, purchasing power, and the other is the flow of goods. And the flow of goods is a unidirectional motion. The money purchasing power is the circulating. And here he says that the presence of reservoirs in the circulating stream of money purchasing power is the key to the whole situation. Here is where the business cycle originates, and here is where it must be controlled if the control is to be effective. By measuring the changes that take place in the levels of these reservoirs, something that can easily be done on a continuous basis, we can determine exactly what is currently happening. And by taking appropriate action on the basis of this information, we can counterbalance any tendency to move away from the equilibrium condition, thus keeping the economy on a permanent even keel. Okay, so he's going to get into the methods that he prefers or that he has arrived at in order to do this, starting here in chapter 24. And chapter 24 is called Stabilization Methods 1. I think we're just going to read the first paragraph or the introduction of this chapter, and then we will start fresh with it next time. But just to wet your whistle, get you excited, give you a preview for tomorrow's episode, we'll go into just a short amount here of chapter 24, but we'll start over again tomorrow. As stated in the preceding chapter, the measures discussed therein are not of a character appropriate for a definite control of the business cycle. Those that are effective at all are merely methods of reducing the amplitude of the cyclical movements and thereby simplifying the subsequent problem of control. We will now turn our attention to the means available for actually governing the economic mechanism to stabilize the economy and eliminate the alternation of booms and recessions. The first requisite for accurate analysis is that we must determine specifically just what it is that we want to stabilize. The average citizen undoubtedly feels that the establishment of a permanent high level of employment is the number one problem. In the preceding pages, however, it was demonstrated that the market price level is independent of the volume of production, which is Principle 9, and consequently, the cyclical price movements will continue regardless of any action that may be taken with respect to maintaining a high level of employment. It was further shown that these price cycles are inevitably producers of unemployment, barring revolutionary changes in the prevailing attitude toward maintaining wage rates. And any stabilization of employment that might be accomplished would therefore be upset periodically by the business cycle unless some action is first taken to eliminate cyclical price movements. Okay, I'll just state before closing out here that Larson's first book on economics is called The Road to Full Employment. And Larson maintains that the approach to reaching full employment, most people consider that to be, the way to avoid depressions, booms and busts. But Larson says that the solutions for the problem of employment are independent of the solutions that will eliminate the boom and bust cycles. And so they have to be tackled separately. Hence, two separate books for those two things. So we cannot avoid booms and busts through tackling employment. We can eliminate unemployment or move it to a ridiculously low level, but that will not eliminate the boom and bust cycles. So those two things need to be approached differently. At some point in the future, we may go over Larson's book on the road to full employment. But for now, we're doing the road to permanent prosperity. So tomorrow, tune in and we'll get into the meat of chapter 24 on the first chapter on stabilization methods. Meanwhile, we're going to let you out a couple minutes early. And thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.